Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Seattle Torero Club event, How to Build a Sustainable Business, featuring Austin Hirsh and Greg Gibson, class of 2019, and co-founders of the 2050 Company, a Seattle area-based company. My name is Megan O'Rourke, and I'm the Associate Director of Regional Programs for the Office of Alumni Relations at USD. USD prides itself on being a change maker institution. Two ways that our students and our alumni make change in their communities and in the world is through their work in sustainability, as well as their entrepreneurial professional endeavors. Today's event blends the two, showcasing Austin and Greg, who began their entrepreneurial path at USD through the Fowler Social Innovation Challenge, and whose work focuses on sustainable business development, impact-driven ideation, and global food waste reduction. Some housekeeping items before we begin. We are recording this event through Zoom webinar and have activated a Q&A feature, as well as the chat. If you have any questions for Austin or Greg, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will address them at the end of the event. Today's presentation will also be recorded and available on the USD Alumni Association's YouTube channel later this week. A brief intro on the company and owners. The 2050 Company makes food for the future. Residing at a unique intersection between food innovation, supply chain improvement, and brand vitality, the 2050 products reduce food waste from farm to fork while combating the food disparity at home and abroad. The company's first product, the 2050 Smoothie, is an instant smoothie powder made with upcycled fruits and vegetables. Co-founders Austin Hirsh and Greg Gibson both graduated from USD in 2019. After receiving a degree in mechanical engineering at USD, Austin spent the next year building the 2050 Company and pursuing a master's in entrepreneurship at the University of Washington. Greg studied finance and economics at USD and was an M&A deal analyst for Software Equity Group before joining the 2050 Company earlier this year. Austin and Greg, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks so much for having us, Megan, and for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump right into this. All right. Greg, give a thumbs up if you can see it.
Looks good.
Cool. So as Megan mentioned, we started our company kind of right after graduation. We make food for the future, focusing on our first product right here. It's the 2050 Smoothie. It is an instant smoothie made from rescued produce. We'll get into that in a minute. First, Greg and I just wanted to introduce ourselves and talk about how we're connected to USD and got back for this event. So we both graduated in 2019 from USD. As Megan mentioned, I studied mechanical engineering, a little bit different road than making smoothie powders. I started kind of the entrepreneurial route while I was studying at USD in a more engineering focused venture, working on an autonomous electric lawnmower. And I first pitched that at the V2 pitch competition at USD, worked on that throughout like my second half at USD, through the senior design project in the engineering school. And then I'll talk about the decision a little later, but I kind of went through a series of questions to see, is this venture like the best thing for me to be working on now, the biggest impact I can make? And am I the person to make this lawnmower right now? Those are really the key questions we're going to dive into, and we'll talk about that. But that was a unique experience to have that such a big pivot early on. I started the smoothie as part of the Fowler Global Social Innovation Challenge at USD as well. That's what that bottom right picture is from. And I just kind of put together the pitch. Greg and I had we were friends at USD. We had been talking about this idea, and I put it together into a pitch and ended up winning the university level, going on to the global round. That was really the beginning of what would become the 2050 Company after a little name change. And then that competition was right after graduation in May 2019, June. And then The global rounds of the Social Innovation Challenge finished on a Sunday, and on that Tuesday, I started my master's back up here in Seattle at the University of Washington and worked on that MS in entrepreneurship for the next year while building the business. And then eventually brought Greg in so he can tell his side of the story next before we jump into the origin of the business.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. So I'm Greg Gibson, everybody. Like Megan mentioned, I graduated from USD in 2019. I studied finance and business economics while I was there. And they say everyone gets their 15 minutes of fame. Well, I got at least 6 of those 15 minutes giving my valedictorian speech as valedictorian of the business school. So I'm waiting for the other 9 minutes somewhere in the rest of my life. But after studying finance and econ, I went on to work at Software Equity Group, and they are a sell-side mergers and acquisitions advisor to software companies. So I was working there as a deal analyst, working with mostly smaller companies, founders and operators who are trying to raise some money or, have their business be acquired by a larger company. And I worked there for a year and a half, and I liked it, but was looking to move on. And like I said, I was working a lot with founders and operators who had built their own businesses, and that was something that was really appealing to me. And it just so happened that Austin, at a similar time as when I was looking to move on, was looking for a new co-founder. And, I had watched the company evolve from the initial inception of the idea when Austin and I were kind of first chatting about it as seniors in undergrad to, him continuing to work on it through the Social Innovation Challenge and his master's. And so I kind of leapt at the opportunity to join, and the rest is history. So yeah, that's my background, and I'll pass it back over to Austin.
So now that we have kind of skipped a slide, our background's a little more about the business. We've kind of alluded to what we do, but basically the origination of the business was our realization of how big of a problem food waste is. More than 50% of all fruits and veggies grown in the United States end up uneaten for a variety of problems. Maybe they have an imperfect appearance or size or color. I think a lot more people have heard of that type of imperfect produce recently, and there's kind of some more startups and efforts to use that. And this idea was kind of a perfect way to tackle that problem, because not only was it we're not just asking customers to choose the ugly apple over the beautiful one, but we're turning them both into a powder so that they look the same. I think this is actually in the next slide. Yeah, so I kind of jumped right to the last one. Another reason for waste is just kind of more of an unknown issue people don't realize, but just surplus. It's pretty boring, but if there's not a buyer and a farmer has already grown 500 pounds of berries and no one is there to buy them, then that farmer has to get rid of those berries. And this is a problem that really hasn't gotten as much attention as the imperfect produce, but it's arguably bigger. So our idea here is if we can buy up that surplus produce, freeze dry it so it lasts longer, then we can save it until the surplus is over and now there's a scarcity of these fruit, and then we can sell them kind of when the curve of the market flattens out. And that gets into that second circle, which is by using this drying technology, we can take out all of the water in the fruit, leave all of the nutrients and flavor intact, and in the process make it last 2 years rather than a couple days, which goes a long way to cutting out that last piece of waste, which is just perishability, which we all know about. We all have the brown bananas on our counter or the wilted spinach in the back of your fridge. And so if we can make a product that not only can last in your cupboard, not in the freezer, but just out in the air for up to a few years, and can also cut out that perishability in the supply chain, that can go a long way towards eliminating that food waste problem. On the other side of it, we also just wanted to make this more convenient than what's out there today. So right now, if you make a smoothie, you're probably buying frozen fruit, adding a bunch of different ingredients. Maybe it's taking up half of the room in your freezer. Maybe you run out of fruit and have to go buy it. So if you can just have something always in your cupboard, then people will choose this just because it's more convenient and make an impact in the process. And that's kind of a big theme we'll get to a little later on. So if there's any current students in the audience, I just wanted to put this slide in there to encourage people to take advantage of resources at universities, or even if you're a USD alum and might be at grad school like I did. I did the V2 pitch competition at USD, the Global Social Innovation Challenge at USD during my time at UW, Dempsey Startup Competition, Environmental Innovation Challenge. That's in there twice, maybe twice as important. Northwest Entrepreneur Competition. This is just to say there's a lot of resources right now in entrepreneurship, and we really got our start just by pitching at these pitch competitions, and it's a key part of the story. So I just put this in there because if there's anyone who's a student at USD, there's a lot of these resources, even more than when we graduated. So I encourage you to look into that. And also just, yeah, it's just a great part of being at USD. And then finally, really how we launched, this was after I finished my master's, before I brought Greg on. We launched the product on Kickstarter. And this was another interesting experience. And if there's any like future founders in the audience, I'm happy to talk more about the Kickstarter experience because it's a unique platform to start a business on, and it has its own kind of little things that you don't know about until you run one. So I graduated and basically spent that next summer working on the Kickstarter. It was right when COVID hit. The last quarter of my master's was virtual, actually, and kind of the start of COVID in the States was at the University of Washington. So we were kind of like shut down before the rest of the country. And so I moved back in with my parents, kind of spent the summer working on this, really built it by myself. And it ended up being really successful. We had a bunch of supporters come out and really believe in the idea. And that and those pitch competitions I mentioned really provided not only like the financial backing to start this business, but also just the validation that this is a good idea that is worth investing my time into, and also worth going to my friend and saying, I think you should invest your time into it. So I just mentioned those so that if anyone has any specific things they want to learn about pitch competitions or Kickstarter, they can reach out and we can talk about those more in detail. So to get into kind of the main topic here, which is how to build a sustainable, impactful business, I just wanted to start with a case study of another business that started a few years ago with a really good mission for bringing safe drinking water to Africa. And we can kind of jump into analyzing this, but this is just a short video. Greg, give me another thumbs up when I play this if it's working well.
It is exactly what it looks like, a merry-go-round. But this playground equipment makes life a whole lot easier for those who don't have piped water. Branded Play Pump, it supplies rural primary schools with clean drinking water by means of a sustainable pumping system.
As the children play on it, it pumps up clean drinking water into the storage container and then can be taken off immediately or stored for a later date. So they always have water available for drinking. This water is used not only for the school, but also the local people come and collect it.
Roundabout Water Solution has placed over 900 play pumps over safe drinking water boreholes in South Africa and 230 in Lesotho. And for this day care, the play pump has been life-changing.
So
it is exactly what it.
This seems like a pretty good idea. Obviously, this is a big problem that a lot of people know about. Greg and I were actually we just spent the 2 weeks before Thanksgiving in Tanzania visiting some communities, kind of similar to the one in this video. And safe drinking water is like the number one thing that people want if they don't have it. So firsthand, we know this is a good idea. This is the type of solution that would appeal to me because it's a creative use of how to harness like children's play through engineering to deliver on this big problem. And a lot of people, when this came out, really loved the idea. They had a lot of like A-list supporters. They raised millions of dollars from the government. Jay-Z had a deal for every album sold. They would donate to Play Pump. And they raised millions of dollars. They had these partnerships and it didn't really work. And I'll let Greg talk about that a little bit. But yeah, this is an interesting story.
Yeah, and it sounds like a great idea, right? Utilize the power of playing children to provide a sustainable water supply in a community. Like that sounds fantastic. And so like Austin said, they got all these sponsors and started ramping up and developed this, and we're kind of a media darling. And they had, I think, set up like 1,800 pumps across 4 countries throughout Southern Africa. And then they realized, this doesn't really work like we thought it would. One of the biggest issues is that this pump would require constant force. And so like most merry-go-rounds, once you start spinning them, then they'll start to freely spin. But this kind of took a lot of effort to push and pump. And so kids would fall off and occasionally break limbs. People in the community would even start paying kids to push it. But oftentimes what would end up happening is the women in the village would have to come at the end of a long day, farming, spending hours on the farm. They'd have to come and push this merry-go-round to pump water for their village. And they all said, it was a lot easier to use the old hand pumps that we were using before. It's a lot more efficient. And it was just less strenuous. And another thing, these pumps would just break down over time, and the people in these communities didn't have the tools to repair them if they broke down. So they were kind of just left with their hands tied. So there are a lot of issues with this. I mean, the last one is, this pump cost 4 times the amount of the old hand pumps that they're using. So it was a great idea. And the moral of the story is, especially the people listening to this talk, if you're, wanting to know how to build a sustainable business, most people want to make a difference in their lives, but good intentions can all too easily lead to bad outcomes. And so, we want to kind of go through a few questions that you should be thinking about as you maybe want to develop your own sustainable business to avoid becoming a case study like the Play Pump. So Austin, I think we can.
So yeah, great. And yeah, how can we avoid being the next Play Pump? Like Greg said, this is a really good example of an idea that seemed great from people who had really good intentions of helping people, but didn't necessarily talk to those people ahead of time. So really, if you get anything from this talk, the most important thing while you're starting a business is just to constantly question your intuition and question your assumptions. And Greg and I do that all the time. And then we find some other thing that we've been assuming for months. And it turns out, if we had just really broken down this problem, it would have saved a lot of time and changed this. So that's the number one thing we can say. And these next questions are all ways you can question your intuition. So number one, how big is the impact? Obviously, if you're devoting your life to a problem, you want it to be a big problem. Number two, how will your venture sustainably drive this impact? If you have this big problem, how are you going to fix it? And number three, is this problem a good fit for me or my company to take on? Are you the right person? Is this the right company to solve this problem? So jumping right into that first question, That example from the play pump, we actually learned about from this book called Doing Good Better by the founder of this movement called Effective Altruism. And it's kind of like a buzzworthy name. Greg and I like kind of disagree over the term altruism, what that means. But essentially this definition just means a philosophy and social movement that advocates for using evidence and reasoning to determine the most effective way to benefit others. So another way of saying that is it doesn't use your intuition or your first thought. It really looks into the evidence because sometimes your intuition turns out to be wrong. So this is a first question. You all can put your best guess into the chat. It's a kind of a hard one. What is your best estimate for the cost of saving one human life? So if you in the audience want to just put a guess into the chat or into the Q&A, we can go from there. Feel free to say anything. There's no like necessarily one correct answer to this. So we're just looking for best guesses. And Megan, will those go in the... Okay, yeah, just in the chat.
I like to an answer like an engineer, it depends. Yeah. Let's see, we got some answers coming in, $10, $100.
It depends. It's a good answer to go with. $1,000. Okay, well, I think probably $2,050. That's it.
My favorite
that
answer.
Would be a little suspicious. I think probably the best answer is Shaden, which isn't very satisfying. And we actually do have a real number from this same book that had the example of the play pump. He estimated the most rigorous estimate would be $3,400. So that is determining what we'll talk about in the next thing, finding the most effective charities that put the dollar best to work. And the best charity, their estimates, the charity's own estimates, put it at $200. So that's kind of like the low end of this estimate. And then this organization kind of took that estimate with a grain of salt and applied it in the most rigorous way to find that 3,400. So it's somewhere between there. Obviously, it's a very hard question because you could go out today and save a life for $0 by pulling someone out of the street when a bus is coming, or you could pay $10,000 to save someone who has a terminal disease. So it's difficult, but somewhere between $200 and $3,400, if you think of a human life being saved, how much we spend each year on tuition or our medical bills and insurance, that's even the highest, most rigorous estimate is surprisingly low. And this question isn't as much to see if you know the right answer. It's just, I've found it helpful to have this number in mind, or this range in mind, to just think of something, because you don't really think of that very often. So to give that a little more insight, these are the charities ranked by GiveWell, that was founded by the same person who found that estimate. That estimate is based on the malaria medicine and malaria nets. Those have been found to be the number one most cost-effective way to save a life, because that malaria is the thing that still kills thousands of people in countries around the world. We have it handled here in the United States, but it's something where a $10 net can save a life. So if you're talking about dollars to lives saved, it's really effective. 3, vitamin supplements. 4, parasitic worm medicines. 5, just straight cash transfers to extremely poor people. So my point here isn't to say you should donate to these charities. The point is just, when I think of what the most effective charities are, I think of charities taking on the issues I see in my everyday life, maybe homelessness or cancer or things like that. And it's just interesting to see some of the best solutions to the biggest problems in the world are really boring. And that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're thinking of how you can make the biggest impact. It might not be the most exciting solution, like a merry-go-round that pumps water, but it might make a big impact, like just providing malaria nets.
And that leads right into our poll number 2. And you can just, once again, answer with the prompt that just came up. Which of the following solutions do you think would most effectively help prevent global warming of 2 degrees Celsius by 2050? And if you can just answer one of the multiple choice questions there, and we can see what the people think. Give you a little more time.
Okay. Well, we have some for electric cars and composting. Let's see.
So if you actually want to look at the solutions that help reduce global warming of 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, you'll notice that electric cars and composting don't even make the top 4 here. You'll see that's where refrigerant management shows up. And this ties right back to what Austin was talking about. Some of the things that we all hear about in the news and that are, some of the sexier solutions to combating climate change might not be the number one best way to do so. And that's where you see, improved solar panels is 10, electric cars is 24, composting all the way down at 57. So it's really just about, you need to challenge your intuition into what has the biggest impact. And that's actually what drove us to, pick food waste as one of the things that we wanted to tackle. You see it's there as number 1 on the best solution to combat climate change. And that's, something that we didn't know, but we found in a study in 2019 when we were seniors in college and said, maybe there's something that we can do to help reduce food waste. And that's kind of how the company was born.
Yeah, and just to say a little about these results and how they find them, these were found by Project Drawdown, which is a nonprofit coalition of scientists, activists, people in the government who all work together to determine these. Essentially, what does it mean to be more effective at preventing global warming? They find how much carbon can be drawn down out of the atmosphere by each solution. They find the cost and the savings of doing this. So it's basically ranked, what is the impact of doing this compared to what is the cost and feasibility of doing it. So it's finding what has the biggest impact kind of for the lowest cost and best feasibility. And this, like Greg mentioned, this is an example of like kind of us making this company and then finding this thing that supports it. Drawdown was a big deciding factor to what company we were working on, because I was working on that lawnmower and I was like, well, electric cars are obviously making a huge impact. Let's do the same thing with lawnmowers that are 2-stroke engines. And then I kind of started thinking about it and I found this, and I was shocked that reducing food waste is the number 1 problem, because it is such a boring thing and it seems easy to solve. But this is another just important example of how the sexiest solutions might not be the best solutions. And we're happy to share the sources for all of these afterwards as well.
Yeah, so, with that in mind, that food waste is a huge issue, and it's obviously central to our company's mission. We can talk a little bit more about how we think about food waste and how we chose to tackle it. So like Austin mentioned, 50% of American produce goes uneaten, which is just staggering. And we can break that down a little more specifically in the next slide, Austin. So like Austin mentioned, that waste comes from a few different places. It comes from the farms, and then it comes from post-harvest, which is like in transit to retail and in homes. So 33% of the food waste that we see gets wasted on farms, and that's 6 billion pounds of fruits and vegetables that aren't harvested, whether it's due to supply chain fluctuations or different weather patterns. And then an additional 29% gets wasted post-harvest, either being transported to retail or in retail itself. We learned that 1 in 7 truckloads of produce gets turned away at grocery stores just because it doesn't meet the perfectly manicured, beautiful standards that we all have as consumers here in the United States, even if it's perfectly good fruit. And then the biggest culprit of the food waste actually is you and me at our homes. And this is where almost 40% of the food waste happens. So Austin and I, we saw that, food waste is actually the biggest, way to fight climate change. Then we decided to pull back the layers and see where's that food waste coming from? How can we create something that, kind of tackles it at each step of the supply chain? And that's where the 2050 smoothie ultimately was born. We reduced waste at the farms by getting their surplus or imperfect produce, by transforming it into a powder. It eliminates spoilage during shipping, and things that might have gotten rejected in retail. We're taking those fruits, converting them to power, so we're reducing waste at the retail level. And then ultimately for the end consumer, it's nice because now you have this smoothie powder that is shelf stable, has a shelf life of over a year at least, and you don't have to worry about throwing away fresh fruits and vegetables, not to mention, it's more convenient, doesn't take up freezer space. So we kind of developed this product with, all 3 steps of the food waste supply chain in mind. And so it's just an instance of kind of identifying the problem first, checking your assumptions, and then figuring out a solution to tackle the issue after you've done your research.
So that kind of leads us into question number 2. We just talked about how 2050 smoothie drives that impact to that problem we identified. And we wanted to talk about that a little more broadly so we can apply it to different businesses. So for this, another quick video of a very famous event in kind of environmental history, which is the hole in the ozone layer.
Like a sunscreen for our planet, the ozone layer absorbs most of this harmful radiation and protects us. But in the early 1980s, scientists discovered that the ozone layer was thinning over Antarctica each August and September. In 1987, nations around the world came together to fix the problem through the Montreal Protocol. The international treaty banned the production of ozone-depleting chemicals like chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs. But these chemicals had been in use for decades, and they stay in the atmosphere for a long time. So it took a while to see the effects of the ban. In 2000, the ozone hole was the largest ever observed by scientists. But conditions slowly improved. Data from NASA and several partners show a 20% decrease in ozone depletion during August and September from 2005 to 2016. In 2017, the hole is the smallest since 1988. A year later, the hole was smaller than expected. Studies suggest that the ozone layer over Antarctica should mostly recover by the middle of the 21st century.
So,
like a sunscreen.
This is an interesting example. I think the problem of the hole in the ozone layer is very famous, But I don't think a lot of people know about how successful the solution has been to close it. I wasn't alive when the hole in the ozone layer was found, but I heard about it multiple times growing up. And I didn't find out until college that it was actually closing and getting smaller and smaller every year. And there's a lot of kind of negative stuff out there around climate change and all of the negative trends happening. And personally, I think that this is a really good example of the world coming together to tackle a problem, and it should be advertised more because it gives you hope. So what was successful here, and how can we kind of learn from that? So they mentioned that it was caused by these chemicals, the CFCs, that were in like propellants and refrigerators and aerosol cans. And scientists found out those were contributing to the hole in the ozone layer. So world governments came together and thought about solutions, as we've seen them do in Copenhagen and different groups since then. The difference here is that the solution to this was relatively simple. You could make new refrigerators and new hairsprays that didn't have these harmful chemicals, and it wouldn't make the product any more expensive or inconvenient for the customer. So people are happy to make that change. And this is a really important thing to see, because for the most part, people don't actively want to be unsustainable. They just also don't want to make their lives less convenient or have to spend more money. So really the key, if you're starting a sustainable business, is to find a way where you can harness people's self-interest instead of working against it, to get them to do something that's better for them and the planet. So in this case, it wasn't too hard to convince people to throw out their old fridge and get a new, better fridge that would keep their food better, that had new features, and that, by the way, didn't have these harmful chemicals. They were happy to do that. And there's a few more examples of products today that kind of use this. So we mentioned electric cars earlier. Some people thought those would be the top way to drive climate change, and they are really effective. If we're gonna reach net zero by 2050, we're gonna need to electrify cars. Two really successful iterations of this solution are Priuses and Teslas. Priuses are a hybrid. They've been around for years. Teslas are pretty new. This is the Tesla Roadster, which is like their really nice sports car. I think a lot of people think people choose these cars primarily because they're sustainable. But I also think if you polled people, probably they like that they're sustainable, but a lot of people choose Priuses because they save them money on gas. And a lot of people choose Teslas because they're like the fastest cars out there, and they look really sexy, and they're a nice, cool, sleek car to have. So Tesla and Prius aren't out there only hammering out the sustainability. They have these other things that help the people, and the sustainability is just kind of built in. Similarly, plant-based meat. One of my favorite companies is Impossible Foods, and I really like the way their founder, Pat Brown, thinks. He says, we have zero interest in vegetarian customers. In fact, I'm not being ironic. Every time we sell a burger to a vegan or a vegetarian, it's actually a complete waste in terms of our mission. And I think a lot of people don't assume this when they see an Impossible Burger. They assume it's made for vegetarians who don't eat meat but want a good tasting burger. In reality, Pat Brown and Impossible have made it extremely clear that they are making burgers for meat eaters. And eventually it will be cheaper to make a plant-based burger than a cow-based burger. And if it tastes the same, has the same nutrition, cooks the same, and costs less, then a lot of people who currently eat meat will be willing to change, just like they were willing to change to a new refrigerator that didn't have these chemicals. And this is a similar way we think about the smoothie. We could sell the smoothies to the really sustainable people, but chances are these are the people who are getting their fruit already from local farmers markets, living a really sustainable lifestyle. But if we can make a product that is so convenient and packs your nutrition into such an easy packet that it takes a minute a day to get all of your fruit you need for the whole day, then we can not only attract the people who are already making their whole life sustainable, but also the people who would like to be sustainable, but really just care about convenience and nutrition and hitting those first.
Yeah, and so like Austin said, this is kind of how we, think about it. And we're constantly looking at data and seeing what our customers really want. And you can see there that taste, nutrition come first, and then comes sustainability and convenience. And so, goal number one is to make something that tastes good and is nutritional. And if it can have the positive externality of also being sustainable, then that's great. We can go to the next slide too. And
sorry, to be clear, it's a difference between our priorities and our customers' priorities. So our priority, number one, really is sustainability, but we recognize that our customers have different priorities. So the trick is building that into something that delivers on their top priorities while being sustainable.
And I think that ties into, I think Shaden had a question in the chat earlier about, sustainability being something outside of just, the environmental lens. And I think that's something you always need to be thinking about is, it's not just about the environmental lens. It's about how can I create something with long-term value to everybody involved, and most importantly, the customer. Because not everybody is going to buy something just because it's sustainable. You have to have other factors with your product that make people want to come back and buy it again and again. And so it's really important to think of your product as sustainable outside of just that environmental framework. And that's where you kind of see us here at the intersection of nutrition, convenience, and sustainability with all these other companies that have done well, either in those categories alone or kind of bridging the gap between multiple. And we kind of saw that, other companies were able to create products that were successful in these spaces. If we have something that targets these, three kind of self-interest values, we'd have a product that itself was sustainable long-term.
So, and we'll get through this last question pretty quickly, so we have time for questions. But the last part is it a good fit for me and my company? So I talked a bit about lawns. This kind of speaks to the first question, is the problem big? What is the impact? These are stats I didn't know about lawns. 5% of the nation's total air pollution comes from lawnmowers. That doesn't sound like a huge number, but if you think of like all of the things contributing emissions and then mowing your lawn is 5%, that's pretty significant. And then these other stats, between 30 and 60% of US fresh water is irrigation. That's not only lawns, but like household irrigation and municipal. Gasoline spilled each year more than the Exxon Valdez, and 10 times as much pesticide per acre of lands than lawns. So this was the rationale behind this. The problem was definitely there. The way of solving the problem was also there. I think the technical idea, I still think it's a great idea. But basically what I realized is I was a 22-year-old fresh out of college working on this alone. It would be hard to make this product and compete against a corporation like John Deere. And I would need a huge team of engineers to make something so technically complex. So that was when I started looking at what does the data show for the biggest place I can make an impact in a product I can put together today and sell in the next few months. And getting a freeze dryer and freeze drying some fruit and selling it was a good option there. So we're going to just kind of go through a speed round of some problems we've faced in the company and how we've thought of them. So we've talked a lot about food waste. More than 50% of American produce is wasted. Our first intuition was that Greg and I would go to all these small farms, rescue produce by hand, and freeze dry it in our little freeze dryer. This goes back to what Greg was saying about sustainability. It's not just about environmental sustainability, but a sustainable business is a business that is profitable and is running in 5 years and not out of business. And just the technology of freeze drying makes it not very feasible on a small scale. So that was the hard truth. And how we figured that out was we can make a bigger impact by partnering with someone who already exists in the supply chain and is already working with companies. And we can work with them to rescue this produce and rent time on their dryer instead of buying $1 million machine of our own. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, and so another problem that we faced where we had to kind of challenge our intuition was the problem of plastic. You know, to create a product like ours, especially a CPG product, a lot of times you have to figure out what you're going to put that in. And we had read that there's going to be more plastic than fish in the ocean. And so we were very mindful of our plastic use. And so our intuition, well, let's just use 100% compostable packaging and that'll be that. And we'll kind of have the most sustainable thing out there. Sad reality is, even if you do have compostable packaging, a lot of times that will just end up in the landfill no matter what, and won't get properly composted. You can see the map there. There are so many states in gray that don't even have access to a single composting facility that processes the compostable material we would have to use. And so instead, you know, of our initial intuition of using compostable packaging, we decided, okay, let's use recyclable plastic material, but figure out a way to make it the most sustainable. And that's where we really harness the power of these partnerships. One with Repurpose Global, and they're an incredible business that they provide plastic offsets. So for every pound of plastic that we use, we pay them a plastic offset and they recover the equivalent weight in low value ocean-bound plastic in areas around the world that especially need waste management. You know, developing countries like India, where the plastic crisis is critical, they focus on having an impact there. So versus us, you know, saying, oh, we're going to figure out how to figure out the recyclable plastic problem, we partnered with Repurpose, who they're experts in the matter and they know what they're doing. And we're going to have the biggest impact we can by putting, you know, things in their hands, because we're not the experts at it at the end of the day. So that's one example for the plastic of a partnership that worked well. And then another is there's this company called Trex, where they create lumber, composite lumber that's made from 95% recycled plastic material or recycled lumber. And with our partnership with them, we thought, hey, it's great that we're offsetting it with Repurpose, but we're also putting this plastic out into the world. How can we, you know, mitigate that? And so we developed a recycling program where our customers can send back their packs to us and receive a reward, whether that be free smoothies or discounts. And then we take that plastic and send it to Trex, who repurposes it into the lumber you can see on the right. That is, you know, a really concrete example of where that plastic is going and how it can actually be used in a way where it's not going to end up in a landfill. It's going to the decking in someone's house where it'll stay for 20 years and be used. So those are some examples where, like, we knew we weren't the experts in the plastic waste problem, but we knew there were companies out there doing great things that we could partner with to help us find a good solution. And so, yeah, I think we can go into the last problem here, the hunger problem. Austin, I'll let you cover this.
Yeah, and any of these could probably be a full hour discussion, especially this one. This is kind of the most recent thing we found. The UN has found that by 2050, we're going to need to produce like more than twice as much food as we're producing today. And we found out this is really tied to the food waste problem, because right now we're throwing away 50% of the fruits and vegetables we produce in the United States. So our thinking is we're going to need to produce more food either way. But before we jump to just ramping up all food production, it's really important to tackle food waste first and kind of plug the leaky hole in the bucket before dumping more water in. So this is a problem we really wanted to take on. We got in touch with this cool organization, and our first thought was, we have these smoothies that have 100% fruit. They're shelf stable and light and compact. What if we sent them to hungry people around the world? That works. It would work great in the US, and we want to do something like that. But one problem is that the hungriest people in different countries don't necessarily want our premium fruit products. Like if you're talking about how far a dollar can go, there are other nutritious foods that could probably feed more people. And also, Greg and I are not experts in combating food disparity. So this was definitely an area where we needed to find a good partner. And actually through USD and the Global Social Innovation Challenge, I was connected with Floyd and Kathy from the outreach program. They've been working for about 20 years, providing to meals to people both in the United States and in Tanzania and East Africa. They've provided about 600 million meals, had a huge impact, and just really know the problem backwards and forwards. So we're actually in the process of building a connection with them and had the opportunity to go to Tanzania for 2 weeks with Floyd and Kathy right before Thanksgiving. So this is kind of something in development, but it's really exciting and a good example. And one important thing we really love about their organization is they don't just send food over there. They talk to the communities, figure out what they need, formulate using science, which meals will serve these needs. You can see the rice and bean meal in that picture I took down in the right. And then they trade these meals for things that people can provide so that it's a sustainable thing. This goes back to the sustainability aside from environmental sustainability. This is a sustainable partnership that outreach has with these communities because it's not providing free food. It is trading and engaging in commerce. So this is something still in development. We have some exciting stuff coming out with outreach in the next few months, but we thought we'd just mention that and share a bit about our trip. And we're happy to talk about any of these. So it went a little longer than I expected. We only have a few minutes left for questions, but we're happy to answer any questions. This is our website. If you want a discount, you can use that code. And yeah, thanks for joining us. We hope this was helpful.
Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks, you guys. I know I learned a thing or two from listening to you guys. A lot of misconceptions for sure. Just a lot of things that, you know, if I did want to start my own business one day, I have the tools to be able to do that, or at least a little bit. So we do have a couple of minutes for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and ask on behalf of those who wrote in at the registration and today. So if anyone has questions that they would like to ask last minute, feel free to put them in the Q&A. But the first that I have is, what advice do you have for a USD student entrepreneur that has a business idea and wants to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was wondering that myself at USD. There are so many resources. So basically in every, like in the engineering school where I was, there were so many resources. They're really getting into entrepreneurship. They have their own kind of program going. They've partnered a lot with the business school where Greg was studying. The Center for Peace and Commerce, they have the Fowler Global Social Innovation Challenge. If you have an idea that has a social impact, I would definitely encourage you to apply. It doesn't hurt. I applied to that twice and the V2 once during my time at USD. Even just applying and going through like the first few rounds is really valuable. The Brink is on campus. They help small businesses just kind of with day-to-day like accounting and a little bit of legal stuff. There's a legal clinic, which is law students helping. The list really is extensive. USD has so many resources, but I would just find those resources and just get started with it. And I think Megan's going to send out our emails afterwards, and we're also definitely available to like make introductions and provide advice on that.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Austin. To touch on your last point, I think it is important also, you know, reach out to alumni who are doing something similar, or even your peers at USD. If you meet folks in the Social Innovation Challenge, ask them about best practices. Two of our best friends from USD, Peter Toomey and Dane Baker, are also running a sustainable business called EcoCart, and they both just made the Forbes 30 under 30 list, which is awesome. And they got their start at USD, and I'm supposed to talk to Peter this weekend, and I'm gonna, pick his brain for questions about, some issues we might be going through. So just always use all the resources available to you, peers and alumni included.
Wonderful. How applicable are your undergraduate degrees to the daily work you take on at this startup?
Yeah, I get this a lot because it's hard to see the connection between a mechanical engineering degree and making smoothies. There definitely is a connection, just in what kind of attracted me to both. I was attracted to engineering, not necessarily because I'm the type of person who takes apart an engine to see how the gears turn. Like, I really like that, but I was really attracted to engineering because I'm a problem solver, and I like thinking of a problem, thinking of solutions, testing them out, questioning my assumptions. And that's really boiled into the engineering mindset. And so I think USD did a really good job of kind of teaching that problem solving mindset and kind of combining the hard skills of engineering with kind of the so-called soft skills of all of the other kind of liberal arts classes. And so while I might not use like the formulas from thermodynamics every day, I definitely rely on the overarching mindset from that degree. Greg can talk to you. His is a little more relevant.
Yeah, and obviously from, being a finance and econ major, there are things that I'm using from so many different classes I had in the business school. But I think the biggest lesson learned is like every class kind of matters, because you'll pick up some tidbits that are definitely going to come in handy one day. You kind of have to be a jack of all trades as an entrepreneur. You have to, be good at marketing. You're probably going to have to handle your accounting by yourself at the beginning. You have to know industry and markets. And so a lot of the stuff that I learned, and even my, intro to marketing classes, still come in handy every day for me. So, even business law too, like you're going to have to negotiate contracts. And so just make sure, you are paying attention in all those classes, even if you think, oh, I'm, going down the accounting route. Well, maybe you'll pivot one day like I did. I was going down the corporate finance route and decide I want to be an entrepreneur. And then you're going to need these little pieces of information from all the classes and areas. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that one.
Awesome. And then the last question, rapid fire answers, is what professor or person at USD really helped kickstart your career, and what students or who students should know if they're on campus, or even alumni if they're coming back to campus?
This is so many. I mean, I was in the engineering school, so I had so many influential professors. Like one, Tom Lupfer, he was one of my professors, and he runs his own business. So that was kind of one of my first introductions to like the entrepreneurial side of this from an engineering professor. Venkat runs the kind of entrepreneurship stuff in the engineering school. And then I just made, so many connections throughout the community, like across campus. Juliet was on this from Center for Peace and Commerce. I met her through the Social Innovation Challenge. And students, obviously I met Greg at USD, and now he's in this business with me.
Yeah, for me, I loved so many of my professors at USD, and Dr. Conroy and Dr. Ma in the econ department were absolutely fantastic. I actually was able to do some research with Dr. Conroy, and the econ department is really good at getting you acquainted with how to look at data and analyze data and kind of get rid of all your intuitions, like we talked about in today's presentation, and just try to look at it with an unbiased eye. And that stuff I've carried forward both to my investment banking job before this and every day at 2050 Co. I also had Marcos Fatina, was a great finance professor that I loved, who just made me excited about the inner machinations of business, and really analyzing a business all the way down to its bare bones and looking at industry problems and market problems. I mean, the list could go on, but you're in good hands with all the wonderful professors that we have at USD. I can say that.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Before we go, we did have someone write in and agree with you, Austin, that Tom Lupfer is the best. So
I saw that. Yeah.
big shout out to him, huh?
Fellow student. Yeah, definitely. I love Tom.
Well, thank you too. We so appreciate you taking the time to go through that presentation with us and to talk to us a little bit more about your company and how to build a sustainable business. Thank you also to everyone who logged in today and who are going to be watching at a later time because this is recorded. On the screen, you will see Greg and Austin's information listed. I will also include it on the follow-up email for anyone if you want to connect with them further about any questions that you may have. But listed below are a couple of events that we have coming up from the USD Alumni Association. So it's a mixture of virtual and in person, but you'll see that it's a wide range of opportunities, right? So we have a couple of holiday parties in different areas like New York, Orange County. We have ice skating at the Hotel del Coronado, which is always a fan favorite. What's not listed here, and I apologize for not seeing it here, is our annual Alumni Christmas Mass. It's coming up on December 11th at 5 p.m. For anyone who can make it in the San Diego area or surrounding areas, we would love to see you there. And then a couple of things coming up in the new year in ways to support Toreros on the road for our basketball team. So if you are interested in any of these, feel free to join us and check our website out at alumni.sandiego.edu. And for now, we will bid you adieu. Thank you, everyone, once again for joining us, and we hope you have a great holiday with your friends and family. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks,
everybody.